So I'd like to welcome our very special guest today, Charles Baker, probably best known, not the only thing he's done, but best known as Skinny Pete from Breaking Bad. So welcome to our show, Charles. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, guys. How you doing?
We're doing good. We're doing good. The first question I'll ask, we've been hitting up all our guests with this, is how are you holding up during this pandemic 2020? How's life for you?
I hate to say I got it pretty easy. My wife works from home. Luckily, she can work from home, and has been since this whole thing started. My kids have been doing the homeschool thing because their schools have closed. I was pretty much in the same mode for months before this all started, just because I'm an actor and I haven't had work. We just bought a house, and my main thing has been trying to fix this house, and so I've had nothing but time to do it. And like, if only I had the money, I'd be doing a lot more.
Yeah, that's
but
key.
So yeah, I'm hanging out. We bought the house last August. I insisted that we bought a house with a pool. And in exchange, we ended up buying a house that needed a lot of work. But the pool is brand new. And so we got as much work as we could done on the house that we could afford to get done. And now I'm just kicking it in the pool, trying to figure out what I'm going to do with the rest of it. The worst part of it is, and I didn't know this, was they said, wow, it's like you have a blank canvas to work with. And I have a lot of really like great space to work with. I'm not a painter in that aspect. I don't have any ideas what to do with a big, huge backyard and patio. And I've planted some tomatoes and some flowers, and then I didn't do it right. They're all live, but they're just all over the place now. And, I know nothing about landscaping or decorating or anything like that. So that's been my biggest challenge. It's like, what do I do? But other than that, I'm good. I've got it pretty nice.
It's funny when we reach out to you, we get the email back, and the governor of Massachusetts is Charlie Baker, and you're like, oh, my schedule's wide open too, and I'm like, no, it's not. And I'm like, oh, yeah, wrong person. So we're really happy that you're able to join us.
Right on. Yeah, I could imagine he's a little bit busier than I am at this point.
Yeah,
and there has been a lot of confusion. I keep getting tagged in like articles about Charles Baker said something like, I did not say that. Like, all I'm saying is, hey, Governor, please watch what you say in our name, okay?
Yeah, right. I'm trying to keep that name good.
Yeah.
So the main reason we asked you on today was what we do on our show is usually Aaron and I share with each other an obscure or offbeat album that we like and kind of chat it up. So we've been pretty bored during the pandemic, and we had this crazy thought, hey, let's reach out to famous people and ask them what their favorite obscure album is, because it's certainly more interesting listening to you than listening to us.
Yeah.
That has yet to be decided, I'll be honest. We'll see after the editing, Aaron.
Yeah.
I do my best.
So you were kind enough to share with us your favorite pick is XTC's Skylarking.
Yeah, that's in my top. I mean, like, it's hard for me to like pick an album because I stopped really like listening to full albums a long time ago. And it became more about just kind of picking moments from albums, and like, I like one song off of this album, and I like one song. But that one was when it came out when I was, high school. I listened to it like until my tape player wore out.
Back in those days. I remember tape players. Yeah, it's funny. Like, I'm aware of XTC. I remember, Breakfast with Nigel and Dear God, but I was not familiar with this album actually sat down this morning and listened to it, and
Right on.
it's an incredible album.
Isn't it cool? I
yeah.
love the like the psychedelic jazz kind of the fusion aspect of it that it brought. And I was really into punk rock at the time that it came out. I was living in England in a boarding school that was a Department of Defense boarding school for kids whose parents were stationed in foreign countries. And I was staying in this boarding school because my dad was in Egypt in a war zone. And I'm trying to be all punk rock, living on a military, like it was a nuclear air station in England. And, you know, so I'm as punk rock as I can be. And someone introduced me to that album, and as at the time I was determined I was going to be a musician at the time. So I was like, I loved just everything about it, the orchestration, the rhythms, and then the lyrics. The poetry was just pretty awesome too. So.
Yeah, they seem to have I noticed this real, like, almost nature theme to the album. They're moving through seasons, and it was funny because when we first heard from you, you know, I went on Wikipedia to read up on the album, and there's a huge entry because I guess Todd Rundgren was the producer, and there was a lot of tension between him and the band. And they kept talking about this, and I'm trying to picture in my head how you work songs through seasons. Like, I get the idea intellectually. Then when I sat down and listened to it, like, yeah, I totally get it.
Yeah. It's an art concept album, you know, and that's really cool to me. I was a musical theater kind of buff in high school, along with trying to be a punk rock. And I saw this musical theater aspect to this album where it was telling this story and the cycles of different, you know, a day, a year, a lifetime. You know, it was really just everything about it stuck to me. And I had a lot of I had moved to England from Texas. I was living in Texas before my dad got me into this boarding school, and the song Dear God was the only song that was popular at the time, but it had been pretty much banned from the radio in Texas because it said, I don't believe in God. And you don't say that in the Bible, the big huge Bible belt buckle of the country, you know. And so being the punk rock little rebel that I was, that was automatically like, they're banning this song. I love it. And I had a lot of the same kind of sentiments at the time towards organized religion. And so it kind of like, just like
speak to you.
Yeah.
Spoke to me that way. But also, you know, my grandmother had died just a few years prior to that. And the song Dying had just like, was so familiar to me in that way. And then the man who the Satellite, you know, it's just everything. There was so much about that. Like every song had like, I could connect it to an aspect of my life, and that was really cool. And so I, like you, after we talked about it, I was like, I should go look up a little bit about it. And you know, finding out that it was, you know, somewhat inspired by two of my favorites, Pink Floyd and the Beatles. It was like, oh no, duh. This is why they stuck with me so much. Because my very first album that I ever bought was Pink Floyd's Final Cut.
Please tell me you are a fan of that album. I know many people that don't like it, and I still think it's one of their best.
It was my first album. I mean, it's you know,
it's like your first car, your first girlfriend, it's your first album.
Right. Yeah. It popped my buying an album cherry right there. So, yeah, I had two older brothers. They were 9 and 10 years older than me, and they were my prime music source. And so Pink Floyd was one of their, you know, they were in Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, Beatles, and so I just kind of went with what they listened to, and I was in a really dark place when Final Cut came out. So yeah, I identified with it too. Pink Floyd, and that's the one band that's like, it's my top as far as bands go. But you said obscure albums, so let's talk about Ecstasy.
Yeah. One of my thoughts with that, like Aaron and I have discussed this a few times on our episodes. I know with me, when I find an obscure band that I identify with, or an album, because sometimes a popular band has an album that sort of is, buried. It's
right.
You almost feel like an ownership of that. It's like, this is my music.
Yeah.
Other people don't know it. You can be a little possessive of it. It's a cool feeling.
Yeah. It is.
I'm almost the type of person that gets angry if other people don't also share that. I don't know if anyone else feels the same way, but
no. I have friends when we used to actually be able to get together. We would just sit down and like share music. Like, oh, I have a Bluetooth speaker that'll allow two phones to connect, and like whoever's playing music, that's the one that'll play. And so we can just sit there and just, well, have you heard this song? And they'll play some song I've never heard of. I'm like, wow, I love that. Like, what's the name of that? And start add that to my list.
Yeah.
And then I'll play one that, and it comes to be kind of this like song off. And funny story about that, while we were shooting El Camino, the Breaking Bad story, me and Matt Jones, who played Badger, we sat, being in this quarantine is a lot like what it was like being under a strict non-disclosure agreement with Netflix. You're locked in a room, you don't talk to anybody, you don't want anybody to you have to wear a mask everywhere you go. And so he and I we're in adjoining hotel rooms, and we just got together in our rooms one night and sat and had a sad song off, see who had the saddest song on their phone. that was a rough night, but it was, sharing music is one of my favorite things to do. So getting more people to listen to this album would be awesome. So I'm glad you listened to it, and I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, that was really cool. I know I tend to get into listening to the same thing over and over again. So I kind of get selfish reasons to reach out to people and say, hey, what's your jam? Because I like having something new.
Yeah.
Right. I had been finding a lot of fun new music and just playing all these different streaming services that will just play. I'll pick a band, and then they'll suggest music that's based on that band, and I've just gone down like huge rabbit holes of obscure music.
I think we caught ourselves doing that not too long ago. I think it's the best way to find stuff, at least now, versus just go to the record store and pull out whatever you can.
Right. Like that's I'm kind of a stuck at home person anyway. I have two kids. When they are going to school, I'm the one who takes them to and from school. So unless I'm working on a project, I'm usually home. I'm the housekeeper kind of dad guy. And so music is finding music and listening to these, all these streaming, and finding new stuff has been kind of my jam lately. But I do get, once I find someone, like if I find someone new that's interesting enough for me to buy their album, I'm like all in. And then I go back into that original cycle of I haven't listened to anything in 6 months because I've only been listening to this guy. And so if you haven't listened to this dude named Maverick Sabre, check him out, because that's where I went through. Yeah, he's a British R&B. He's kind of eclectic, but he's Irish actually, and really good. Very eclectic kind of sound, an old school with new school kind of mixture. And if you listen to one song, you'd be like, oh, I'm not sure. And then you listen to another song, you'd be like, oh, and then you start really like finding out his stuff. But I'll tell you, yeah, we should be talking about ecstasy, but here I am just recommending everything else. But he's the most modern actually musician I'm really into right now. So
that's cool. I'll check it out. My wife, we usually joke. My wife accuses me of listening to difficult music. That's
that's
Residence,
kind of
Tom Waits
point,
stuff.
Though, sometimes,
yeah, it makes you think, makes you feel things. So that's
for me, the poetry. If the poetry isn't there, if the words, like, if they don't resonate, like, I don't know, I'm not too much into this. I love simplicity when it's used genius in a genius way.
Yeah.
And I think that was like George Harrison's kind of thing, was finding ways to just like turn two chords into a really complicated song. And I would, but simplicity, just because they don't know any better, is no fun for me. And that's why I like the ecstasy, is because it's very simple, but at the same time, like, very complex. I mean, I have a huge, profound respect for people who can do that, who can make it sound easy, and like really just like bring the math into music, really show that it's a really high skill, and those guys seem to have it.
I think almost all British bands are prog at heart. That's
yeah. I think they have some pretty high expectations, like, to be to be called a British band, and for us to know that they're a British. I mean, like, the thousands and hundreds of thousands of British bands we don't know about. That's so yeah, I think if they've made it across the pond, usually it's for a good reason, and it's because it's kind of like my acting teacher told me when I was in college, was like, if you can't make it in your hometown, why would you bother going to LA or New York? And so I think that's kind of, if they've, typically if they've made it here, it's because somebody was supporting them. And every now and then they pay their own way and do it, and look at me, and nobody's interested, but and I think it's the same way if they've heard of us in England and in Europe, and they know our music, then we've made it, as far as the local bands here go. Now it's a new dynamic, because you can hear people anywhere in the world. I followed a guy from South Africa for a while, and it was
it's funny you say that too, because on the opposite end, I followed that rabbit hole and found this group called Dead Poet Society, who happens to be from the Boston area where we are, and they're way bigger than I even knew. And I played in local bands and stuff in the area.
Yeah.
I never knew. So it's funny they big, and I had no clue.
Yeah, it's all about the circles you're in and the people and eventually that's where when it's a band that makes it to your ears, it's in your hometown, but you heard it from somebody else, that's not bad for that band.
No.
I'm sure they would have liked to have heard them before that, but it happens. I have a friend who, she's a soloist. I'm going to say a lot now. She's a soloist, and she was having a private show, a little show in Texas. And I was thinking of trying to talk her into doing a soundtrack for a short film that I was about to shoot. And so I went to go see her show. I was in Texas at the time visiting my in-laws. And I went to go see her show, and the band opening for her, as I'm talking to her before she goes on, because she's like, show up early and talk to me. I'm like, okay. So as I'm talking to her and I'm just about to say, hey, would you mind doing a soundtrack, helping me write a song for my soundtrack? The band that opened for her started up, and I kind of went, hang on, I'm going to go listen to this. And I went and listened to this band. And long story short, I didn't make the short film. But I ended up really digging the band before her. And I still dig her music, but I ended up actually approaching them about doing the soundtrack if I were to make that short film. And it's amazing how, like, I was from Texas. I knew all the bands. Like, I used to shoot video for bands in Texas. That was kind of how I made a living for a while, was doing videos for bands, local bands. And here was these kids that I'd never heard of, just like killing it and doing the kind of stuff that we like. And that, like, I asked them, like, where do you guys, like, what was your inspiration? They're like, we were inspired by the music our parents listened to, you know, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, the Beatles. And I was like, you can hear every bit of that influence in their music. That is awesome.
Yeah, it's funny. There was a band that Aaron had me listen to recently, and they cite their influence as like the Seattle grunge scene. And, you know, those musicians were inspired by Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin, and you could hear like that 2 generations of music coming through them. It was really cool.
Yeah. And that's stuff like that gives me hope for the future generations that, you know, that they are going to find it. That's one of the things I love about Maverick Sabre is he incorporates a lot of the big band kind of sound into his R&B and rap and hip hop music. And it's incredible because you can hear the influences of the old school music in all of his new stuff, and it's new stuff. It's one of the few things that gives me hope about the future is sometimes we have some kids coming out with some music that just like,
I know. You know, when you reach our age, Aaron probably still has some optimism, but you get in that headset where you're like, oh, all this new stuff is crap. They don't make anything good anymore. And they do, but it's not what we're normally being fed, I guess. So. Yeah.
Right. I knew about that paradigm and was so aware of it that I was like forcing myself, like, no, I'm going to listen. I'm not going to be the old dude who's like, I can't stand this new music. And I tried. I really tried.
They make it hard.
They do.
You know, but it depends on where you're listening, because like I think a lot of the underground local groups, like they get it a little bit more because their influences aren't the mainstream manufactured stuff. You know,
right.
But I get it.
I have an 8-year-old son who's really into video games. So like when he picks music, it's usually like video game soundtrack, like just literally video game soundtrack songs. So I'm just like, I can't do this. This is already making me anxious. Like I've chased Pac-Man way too many times to this song.
Yeah, right.
Listen to this for entertainment.
Yeah.
Right. But every now and then some music comes up that just like inspires you. And that's cool. Yeah.
Keeping our fingers crossed.
Right. So I'm curious, was there anything about Skylarking that you any songs that you in particular you identified with?
I'm terrible at note taking. Like it's funny. I sat down this morning.
You just listened to it one time. You should be able to give me a full thesis, man.
Right.
I mean, really.
Well, you know, it was funny because we talked to Greg Proops earlier, and he had a Steely Dan album that he was into.
Wow.
And he started asking me all these questions about Steely Dan, and I'm like, dude, I've never listened to Steely Dan.
I know. I've heard of Steely Dan.
I'm aware of them.
I'm aware of.
But I did write down like Summer Cauldron, the opening track on Skylarking, really blew me away. There's a lot of the nature sounds that they work in the beginning.
Yeah.
Which now that you mentioned the Pink Floyd, like I can see that Pink Floyd influence.
Right.
I can't remember what track it was, but it was towards the end of the album, that Pink Floyd influence. I almost felt like there was a punk rock thing going on there, sort of. I just can't remember for the life of me the track. It was towards the end of the album.
Right on.
But I didn't listen to it in order, which was weird. I don't know why. I clicked on a random one first, and I was like, oh man, this is great.
Right on. I'm glad you liked it. That's the most important. Keep listening. Come back to me with a review.
I think it probably when we look at our next season, I think I'm going to be picking Maverick Saber to take a listen to.
You should check him out. It takes I was surprised because the song that originally attracted me to him was like full on rap. For a white Irish guy. He's a white Irish guy, but it was like full on kind of gangster, kind of about about school shootings. And I'm not normally really into rap. It wasn't one of my influences, and I'm very like Pink Floyd, Beatles, Led Zeppelin.
Yeah.
That's my stuff. But I heard this song, and I was like, it was the rhythms and the melody and like just something about it. And I was like, I check out some of this other stuff. And then nothing else he does was like that song. Everything else was more in the R&B and the kind of classic, that fusion, that R&B fusion with the classic big band kind of music, and then like some are recreations of old Irish lullabies, and it's just like it's really really cool stuff.
So he got a hook to get you in to listen, and
yeah, but it was weird hook because that's not the stuff I normally listen to. That was weird. It was, but now it helped me go, okay, well, let me start listening to some other
I think we're losing him a little bit here.
Almost at him. It's funny how it just starts to slow down.
Yeah.
Are we back?
Yeah, we're back.
Don't worry. This is where editing comes in.
Yeah. Whew. So where did I start lagging down there? Somewhere in a Maverick Saber rant. So go check out Maverick Saber is how I ended that.
Yeah, definitely. We're gonna. All right. Well, before we wrap up, because I don't want to take too much of your time. I know this is I know, right? and that's what makes this next question weird. Like, I know it's a weird time, and things are uncertain. Do you have anything coming up? Anything in the pipes?
Well, we already shot it, luckily. But HBO has Perry Mason coming out sometime, I think June, maybe July. I don't really know. I don't watch much of anything anymore. I hang out at my pool and pick tomatoes. But yeah, I'm not a good guy. I'm not a likable guy, but I'm in Perry Mason, coming up in HBO, if you have HBO. And that's pretty much the only thing I know of that's coming out. Just released was a little indie film that I did a few years ago. It was my first lead role in a film called 1111, and it's a little sci-fi comedy. It was not a big budget sci-fi comedy, but we had a fun cast. Krista Allen, who's in lots of stuff. Most people recognize her from Liar Liar as the lady on the elevator, but she's done a couple of Adam Sandler movies. She's brilliantly funny, brilliantly smart, and great. She kind of steals the show in 1111. And that's out on all of the streaming kind of services. Amazon Prime is also just came out, so if you have Amazon Prime, you can watch it. I wasn't prepared to do public relations.
Well, it was actually David Urey pimped that for you.
Oh man, yeah.
We talked to him, so I sat and watched it last night.
And I watched the trailer 5 minutes before coming on.
Cool. Cool. Have you been watching David Urey's interpretations of dramatic? Oh my God.
Yeah.
They're brilliantly funny just because of the content. But like, if you're paying attention, you'll notice the dude's a brilliant actor. He's like pulling these off. Like, you get the intent behind every one of them that he does. And it's just like the Three's Company one was like so creepy. It was perfect.
I was telling him, I was sitting on the couch watching him on Twitter, and my wife's sitting next to me doing her own thing, and he was doing the Friends theme, and it was probably a full minute into it when she turns around and she goes, "Oh my God, is that the Friends theme?" Like, he's nailing it, man.
I'm so proud of him, like, for doing that, like, for having that idea and running with it and going with it, because it was brilliant. I wish I would have come up with an idea like that during this. Like, all I got is I'm picking tomatoes, and but like, man, I'm amazed by that kind of stuff. And that's the kind of stuff we need right now, is a new way of like entertaining, and without putting people at risk. And man, did he do it. Like, that's not something you see a lot, and every time I see a new one, I'm like, oh God, I can't wait to see what this is.
Well, it's kind of funny, like, part of our thinking behind what we're doing with you today was we were just sitting around and like, wouldn't it be cool to just like shoot the shit with celebrities, like talk about an album and just chill out, and here we are. Like, yeah,
it can be different depending on the celebrities and the situations. Like, like, if you came over to my house and just hung out, you'd be like, oh my God, this guy's so boring, he just wants to sit and like
pick tomatoes.
He's just like, he just goes on about his garden. That's all he talks about, his garden and his pool.
Well, so I noticed in 1111, your character's wearing a Star Trek tunic for the whole show. So between that and some of the conversations you had as Skinny Pete with Badger, you were Trekkie? Is that ad-libbed?
I wouldn't be full-blown Trekkie. I'm kind of a geek of all trades, It's like, I've been highly exposed to all forms of geekdom. And I used to watch Star Trek, like the original, Kirk, kind of religiously when it was being replayed on television midnights, and like I was working late. I don't know that I'm not gonna like threaten anybody's life over getting, Quaaludes wrong or anything, but I'm very aware of all the references. But like, I know none of Breaking Bad was ever ad-libbed. Even if I had something to ad-lib, I wouldn't have tried to outdo those writers. And that was part of 1111, was that the character is a Trekkie. He's a Trekkie nerd, but he gives UFO tours. In Sedona, Arizona, the UFO sighting capital of the world, he gives tours of where UFOs have been sighted. And that's the Trekkie thing, is his uniform, because he's a space guy. And I loved, like, again, I'm not going to say I'm a Trekkie. I'm a big fan of all of the Star Trek canon, I guess. But I'm also I grew up with Star Wars, so my wife and I, our first date was sadly episode 1, and since it was our first date, it's kind of like Star Wars is kind of like, well, we're doing Star Wars now.
I think my one of my first dates with my wife was Attack of the Clones episode 2.
Right. Yeah, we just like, well, they Jar Jar Binks it, but we're gonna keep going, man. We're just gonna just keep. We committed. We committed with the first date thing. So you know, we're in. I'm not gonna lie. I had this fantasy growing up that if they were ever to make Luke Skywalker's father in a movie, that I would be the perfect candidate to play Anakin Skywalker as a teenager in 20s. And that was like, I was ready. I should have been. I've always wanted to be in a Star Wars movie. And
I could see that.
And here we are.
Well, let's get a campaign going to get you on The Mandalorian.
You know, I don't. Robert Rodriguez is directing the new season. I lived in Texas, where Robert Rodriguez is from, and I couldn't get on anything that Robert Rodriguez directed. I don't think he liked me that much. Taika Waititi is doing the next Star Wars movie, from what I understand.
Yeah.
And I met him at a party, but we just like smoked cigarettes and talked about shitting your pants for a few minutes, and then like never actually like made introductions. And I don't know if he remembers me, but like that'd be cool.
Yeah, we need to make that happen. We'll get to work.
I don't know if that's the best. I don't know if that's the best promotion right there. Remember we talked about shitting our pants? Remember we were smoking a cigarette? You were really drunk, but yeah. Hey, you know. So yeah, I was really excited to see that he's doing one. And then I was really sad to think that I probably won't be in it either. But we'll see. I don't know. Maybe this will be the fulcrum for both of us. That just like, you guys get Pacino next, I get in a Star Wars movie. Bam!
Right? All works out. Well,
he's gonna say the Godfather soundtrack, just in case you're wondering what he thinks his favorite album is.
He knows his story. He knows where his bread comes from.
Okay, that's the thing you edit out. I don't want him to.
We didn't hear anything.
I heard nothing. Hey, dudes, it was great talking to you.
Yeah, thank you
I
very much.
seriously would babble for more, but I'm not going to take more of your time either. I'm sure my wife's going to want to have dinner at some point. But thanks a lot, man.
Yeah,
guys.
thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I'll shoot your agent an email when we drop the episode.
Right on.
Two weeks from now.
2 weeks from now.
Right on. And remind me again, what are you calling your podcast? Or
it's Esoterica the Podcast.
Esoterica the Podcast. Tune in. Right on. You can use that soundbite.
Awesome. Thank you, man.
Thank you so much.
That's church, yo.
Yeah.
Right on, dudes. You guys and Darth Vader back there, you guys take good care of yourselves and stay safe. And I really dig this idea. Can't wait to see what else comes up.
Thanks for coming on. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Right on, man. Peace.
All right. Take care.
All right. Get your Wi-Fi fixed.
Right on. Yeah. Peace. You guys take care.
You too.